and welcome to round 12 of Pro Tour Journey into Nyx. We're here in the feature match area, myself, Tim Willoughby, along with Zach Hill, and the first match that we're going to be looking at is going to be the #2 ranked player in the pro rankings, Reid Duke, playing black, blue, green control. One of the Channel Fireball Pantheon players, very, very strong player, and he's up against Andrea Mengucci, the phenom from Italy, who not many of us will have heard of before yesterday, but he was in the feature match area the whole time yesterday. And already we see things starting off. On the right of our screen, there's Mengucci. He's started with a couple of temples, his Naya deck, all 3 colors already going on, and Reid Duke with a Temple of Deceit and a Forest. He's got all of his colors too.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that you've seen to really begin to define this format is the prevalence of these temples. Players, when they came out, didn't necessarily know what to think of these. How good is Scry 1? Well, the answer is very, very good. We've seen decks here today with as many as 14 of these temples. And one of the reasons I think there's so many mid-range decks is that the temples, you know, in exchange for coming out with a really fast start, allow you to regulate the quality of your draws in the mid-game very, very well.
So read the bones there, allowing Reid Duke to scry a couple of cards at the bottom and draw a few for the cost of a few life. And then one of the ubiquitous cards of the weekend, that a Courser of Crufix for Andrea Mengucci, revealing a lightning strike on top of his deck, which will almost certainly be something that he's going to be able to use to make the most of the life total lead he already has.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the downsides, though, of the red-green with Elspeth deck. Sometimes Lightning Strike, one of the most important cards that you can play, other times it doesn't really do a whole lot. You look at Duke's hand right now, Courser of Crufix, Polukranos World Eater, not really a lot for that Lightning Strike to target. You don't want to be playing it as, you know, 2-mana Lava Spike, just deal 3 damage to a player. Might be able to capitalize on that Drown in Sorrow if you can get Duke to cast it with Polukranos out and leverage the Lightning Strike to finish Polukranos off.
Now, a Sylvan Caryatid there going to the bottom for Mengucci on his scry. Didn't fancy that one too much. The Elspeth's in his hand, not matching up very well at all with the Hero's Downfall that Reid Duke has going on for him.
That is true. On the other hand, at least Elspeth's able to make 3 creatures right away, so you're able to get some value out of it. We're seeing Courser of Crufix really, in the eyes of many, probably the most defining card and one of the most powerful cards in this format. You know, allowing him to play a land off the top of his deck. We had Joel Larson coming in and saying the reason he was willing to play a green deck is that Courser made it feel like he was playing blue. He was drawing so many cards.
And Polukranos there from Reid Duke. That a big enough threat that it's not going to be something easily answered by any burn from Andrea Mengucci. But of course, Elspeth doesn't just make 1/1 tokens. He can tick it down in terms of loyalty to get rid of every creature with a power of 4 or greater. Potentially a downside to having a particularly big creature in this matchup.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the reasons that actually Polukranos, you know, despite being a defining card in Standard, has not been such a defining card in Block is because it matches up relatively poorly against Elspeth.
And a Polis Crusher there from Andrea Mengucci. That actually often being seeing a bit more play than the...
Are we having issues with the player 2 hand?
Able to deal with enchantments and just sort of matches up quite well against a lot of the removal that many decks are playing.
Yeah, Polish Crusher, extremely powerful against Banishing Light, which is one of the few ways in the format to get rid of both a creature and a Planeswalker, Hero's Downfall being the other one. So Polish Crusher, a little bit smaller than Polukranos, certainly doesn't match up particularly well heads up, but does go great against that Courser of Crufix, which is an enchantment creature, and against any Banishing Lights that he might see in other matchups.
Protection from enchantments there, very big indeed. Now, the interesting thing here is that Reid Duke has his Courser of Crufix in play, and it means that there's perfect information for Andrea Mengucci about what's coming in terms of what Reid's draws are going to be. How big do you think it is that everyone gets that information in these matchups?
Well, what I think it does is make this really, really hard. There's just a lot of information to keep track of.
And Stormbreath Dragon there immediately cracking in for Mengucci. That one of the strengths of the red-green deck. It's got an awful lot of reach because it can just power through in the air. Hero's Downfall stopping it on this occasion, but I've seen Mengucci win an awful lot of matches this weekend already with a big hasty dragon.
And we saw a little bit of sly play there. Reid Duke playing Courser of Crufix right into Mengucci's Polis Crusher, potentially tempting him to try and monstrous the Crusher. Reid would then be able to respond with Hero's Downfall, because if the creature dies in response to the monstrous ability, it never actually becomes monstrous. So Andrea wouldn't actually be able to blow up an enchantment. But instead, Andrea just casts Stormbreath Dragon and gets in the red zone, making Reid fall to 15.
And it's just hero's downfall after hero's downfall coming from Reid Duke's deck. Another one there on top of his deck alongside the 2 in the graveyard. So those Elspeth Sun's Champion in Mengucci's hand might want to just hang out for a little bit. He's got plenty of action going on anyway.
That's true, although he's not going to be able to hang out for too long due to Polukranos and Courser Krufik getting in for at least 7, potentially more if Reid decides to activate the monstrous ability on Polukranos.
Doesn't look like he's going to be doing that. I think he's probably quite happy to sit back on a relatively controlling hand. He knows he's winning this race. Mengucci now down to just 9 life. Takes his draw for the turn, and that there's Xenagos. Now, Xenagos and Elspeth, they play very nicely together, assuming that you can get a few extra creatures on the board to power up Xenagos' mana ability.
Yeah, exactly. You use Elspeth to make tokens. Xenagos' second ability to make a lot of mana. Right now, I think Mengucci needs to focus on that Polukranos and how to get it off the battlefield. He's got Elspeth. Of course, that's going to leave the Courser there. And in a mid-range on mid-range fight, Courser just a steady stream of card advantage, as well as a pad on the life total, which over the course of the game can really add up.
Yeah, we've seen a number of games in the feature match area where the small increments even, we're not talking about the sort of 10, 12 life that gets gained some games, but just sort of 1 or 2 life here and there in a tight race is really, really important.
I remember seeing that Patrick Chapin was multiple times could have been threatened for lethal if he wasn't able to gain exactly 1 life off Courser Krufix the turn before.
And that was actually the match where Mengucci first got knocked off his seat of King of the Hill. This is his effort to try and get back into that seat. I spoke to him just at the end of the draft, and he said, well, I went 3-0 in the draft, but the chairs are kind of comfier in the feature match area. I kind of just want to hang out there for the rest of the day, if that's all right.
That's probably what he's doing, is just playing well for seat privileges.
And as polite as Reid Duke is, I think that he might prefer to just stay in the feature match area himself.
And Mengucci's hand, just so many powerful cards after powerful cards. You have to anticipate that he's got the advantage if this game goes long. He's just got to figure out how to stay alive.
And that's the interesting thing, I think, about the red-green deck. There's a lot of red-green decks where the focus is very much on ramp. And there you can have this issue of, well, I might draw my ramp spells, I might draw my big spells, but if I don't draw them both in the right order, then I kind of have a rough time. This deck just top decks really, really well. It has a lot of power in it.
There is an issue with this deck, though. They play, 10 to 12 reactive spells, Lightning Strike being one of them. But that's where you see the power of a deck with 12 temples. It really does allow you to sequence your plays so that you draw the right threats and right answers at the right time.
So Elspeth there had to use the Mind's ability to get rid of Polukranos, meaning that she was open to being bumped off by that Courser of Krufix. We, of course, know that there is another Elspeth just chilling out in Mengucci's hand, ready to go.
I will say that Reid, his hand's pretty well set up against Elspeth. He's got Drown in Sorrow to get rid of the tokens if they become a problem. He's got Hero's Downfall to get rid of Elspeth. What this matchup is going to be about is who has the last threat. We see Xenagos, Polish Crusher. Polish Crusher would be a very interesting card, though. It's whoever won the Grand Prix last week. Stormbreath Dragon and Elspeth. So 4 threats in Mengucci's hand that really demand to be dealt with. 4 answers in Reid's hand, though. The question is whether Mengucci can get value out of his cards before Reid is able to wipe them off the battlefield.
Okay.
Yeah, Reid's control deck, I mean, these are not your traditional control decks that have lots of Wrath of God type effects, but he is trying to sort of deal with everything relatively efficiently and then sort of sit back. So a Satyr there coming from Xenagos the Reveler, getting stuck in.
And I think having Courser of Krufix parity is just huge here. We see, able now to keep up with Reid's card advantage in the mid game. That could allow Mengucci not only to get back in this game, but to pad his life total in a way that allows him a few more turns to deal with that Prognostic Sphinx.
Prognostic Sphinx, a very interesting card, and it was described by Nate Price when he was going through the metagame with us just before we came into the booth as being kind of the king of the format. Reason being, it's really, really difficult to kill for almost all of the decks in the format, and presents a reasonable clock. I mean, it's only 3 turns for it to kill Andrea Mengucci, assuming he doesn't get to play a few more lands just like that and gain some life off his Courser.
I mean, I really think that Prognostic Sphinx was designed almost explicitly for this matchup, particularly. It blocks Stormbreath Dragon very well. It blocks Polish Crusher before they're able to Monstrous. It doesn't die to Elspeth. So, it really is very effective at the particular suite of threats Mengucci wants to present. Now, on the other hand, once Mengucci gets to 8 mana like he has now and those creatures start becoming monstrous, Prognostic Sphinx really kind of understated. 3/5 just not going to be the largest creature on the board. That said, that Scry 3 ability, pretty powerful with a Courser or Krufix on the battlefield.
Absolutely, yeah. Reid can just sort of make sure that he's always able to get value off playing lands off the top of his deck, also filtering through to find the answers that he needs to be able to maintain that parity. Much, much easier for him to be able to do things with Prognostic Sphinx while he's attacking and fixing the top of his deck.
Yeah, you see a bunch of tokens on Mengucci's side of the board. The thing is, against Courser, Krufix, and Prognostic Sphinx, not really able to mount that much of an offense. I mean, he's got 7 power worth of attackers with Reid at 11 life, but not able to get in for that much damage were he to attack.
And the second Prognostic Sphinx on the top there, a bit of a nail in the coffin, potentially, for Andrea Mengucci. The first one you might be able to attack around, but when there's a few of them in play, things get an awful lot trickier. I mean, the one saving grace perhaps for Mengucci is he's now managed to power through every copy of Hero's Downfall. He knows that his Planeswalker's comparatively safe compared to how they have been thus far in the game.
We see Kiora, interesting, not locking down any threats, drawing a card, trying to get Reid yet another card off the top of his deck with Courser. Reid in a decent position, but Mengucci has a handful of threats, and I think Reid's realizing he's going to need a little bit more if he's going to really put this game away.
Yeah, I mean, against the red-green deck, there are many decks where this bug deck can kind of sit back and say, I'm going to sculpt a really great hand. Because the red-green deck can be so explosive, there's not quite that same sort of luxury there. So Reid a little bit keener to get the cards off the top of his deck, gain a little bit more life, and keep that train moving.
Silence the Believer is pretty big. I mean, Reid's able to wipe these tokens off the board with Drown in Sorrow whenever he wants to. The question is what he's going to do about Stormbreath Dragon and Polis Crusher. But that Silence the Believers is a great answer to that question.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's something that Reid is now up to the sort of manner where he doesn't need to content himself with just removing one creature from the game. He can wait around and potentially get 2 big threats out of Mengucci. So, second Prognostic Sphinx coming down now, and Mengucci in a really rough spot here.
Yeah, I mean, he's got enough threats to be able to kill Kiora if he wants to. He has Stormbreath Dragon, which would be able to play a pretty solid game of defense against those Prognostic Sphinx, but seeing Silence the Believers on the top of Reid's deck, not a whole lot for Mengucci to do. Elspeth on the top of his library, not quite going to cut it either.
So a little bit of thought here. Just the Drowning Sorrows in Reid Duke's hand, and a testament to the power of his board already that he doesn't need to use them, even though there's a bunch of perfectly reasonable things to kill off.
I think what he wants to do is just get that second Prognostic Sphinx on the board to threaten lethal if Mengucci has literally nothing with 2 Prognostic Sphinx attacks and Courser of Krufix. Even if Mengucci gains a life, that is still 8 damage from Reid's side of the board. So Reid's setting up the combat math quite well there. Also, Kiora demanding to be dealt with. You have to expect Mengucci to attack this turn with some of those tokens. The question is, what goes where? What goes at Kiora? What goes at Reid? And how is he going to survive this turn, given that he knows about Silence the Believers?
Yeah, kind of an interesting one. It's almost like the old Sage Owl problem, where you know the cards on top of your own deck in those cases, and it can be kind of depressing because you know you're in for a hard time. In this case, he can see the cards on top of Reid's deck and is just sort of worried that he's not going to be getting anywhere.
Well, now, something that we just saw appear in the hand viewer is Lightning Strike, which completely changes the pace of this game around. Because what that means is if Reid lets too much damage through, Mengucci can just straightforwardly end the game by dealing 3 damage to Reid. So, you know, able to get Reid down enough now, he's at least forcing a block. I mean, Reid very likely to block anyway, but...
Yeah, and actually, Lightning Strike, a big component in many of Andrea Mengucci's wins. He can sort of use that to leverage the early damage he's able to deal with some of his more aggressive threats, and just say, I have this burn in my deck, you're a perfectly reasonable target for it.
if Mengucci left his creatures back, he could force Drown of Sorrow, which would at least allow him to tap one of those Sphinxes and make Reid discard a card with Lightning Strike. Also would make sure that he did not die just straight up to the attack. Now, though, he's able to get Reid down to 7. Kiyora's still on the battlefield, and Mengucci gonna have to try and figure out a way to stay alive through both Drown in Sorrow and Silence the Believers. He can activate Elspeth, which means that Reid wouldn't be able to... oh, okay, now he can gain 2 life. That is big game right there, allowing Mengucci to go to 9, meaning he is not going to die to the 8 points of damage from Reid.
And that a fairly relevant spell on the top of his deck there as well, revealed by the double Courser, or both Coursers, I suppose. Going to the bottom, though, he's digging for something better. What's he got? A Magma Jet. That could be huge.
And I mean, I think Mengucci's strategy becoming apparent. Okay, he's able to take down the Courser. But if he's able to get Reid low enough, he's got 4 Lightning Strikes, 3 Magma Jets in his deck. He can just start going to the face. The question is how long he can survive. And Reid with an active Kiora has got some options.
Options, of course, kind of the cornerstone of what Planeswalkers present. In addition to everything you get to do with your mana, you get 1 additional effect a turn. And aside from the ultimate, which is quite a ways off, there's plenty that Reid can be thinking about doing here.
Reid, yeah, attack step, grabs both his Sphinxes and says, okay, what am I doing now? Potentially can scry 6 total cards. So Mengucci has to assume that Reid's next draw going to be live. But we're getting down to the wire. Both of these games are capable of ending very, very fast, and both players are teetering on the brink of a loss if they act a little too recklessly and manage to unintentionally throw a game away. We see Reid attacking before using Kiora to draw that card. Any card he accesses off Prognostic Sphinx, he can draw immediately with the last counter on Kiora.
A really nice interaction there. And of course, it must be really rough for Mengucci kind of knowing that with that many scries going on, every draw that Reid Duke finds is going to be the best of 6, 7 cards.
Well, and the best possible scenario for Mengucci is that Reid just keeps putting cards on the bottom of his deck, because anything he leaves there, Mengucci knows is at least potentially good enough to put this game away for Reid.
So Reid left a Courser on top the first time round.
You go to 3.
And it looks like there's Courser and then some lands. I think we can see Reid's plan here.
Yeah, able to play a Courser, then start chaining some lands, just dig far, far deeper into his deck. Crucially, pad his life total a little, which you have to be at least somewhat worried about seeing Magma Jet right on top of Mengucci's library.
So there's Drown in Sorrow. That's quite a defensive Drown in Sorrow, but it does mean that he's now comparatively safe from damage, and I'm guessing we're going to see this Courser to follow up now.
I think we might even see another Drown to take Mengucci's Coursers off the battlefield, preventing him from gaining a life and finding some way of dealing with Sphinx. Then if Reid plays his own Courser, it of course would stay alive.
A horse, of course. And that enough to get the scoop from Andrea Mengucci. So Reid Duke, 1 game up in the King of the Hill match. The once and future king, Andrea Mengucci, not winning that first game. And they'll be going to game 2 after these messages.
Recall, the 5 Moxes and more. Magic Online Vintage Masters pre-releases start June 13th. You've watched the Pro Tour. How about playing on the Pro Tour? Qualifiers for Pro Tour Magic 2015 are going on now around the world, with winners earning both an invitation and airfare to Portland this August. Visit wizards.com/PTQ for more information.
So we're back now, and we're going to be taking a little bit of a look in one of the other matches that's going on. We have Hall of Famer Patrick Chapin. He was the King of Hill until he lost to Reid Duke last round. He's up against Yuya Watanabe, 2-time Player of the Year. And some similarities in what we're seeing here, at least on the right-hand side of our screen. Yuya playing a variation of red-green with Elspeth, but he actually looks like he has a Worst Fears in hand.
This is a Yuya Watanabe deck right here. You got Johnny, Chained to the Rocks, and Worst Fears in the same deck. Worst Fears, very powerful in this format, particularly against Prognostic Sphinx, effectively serving as a Mind Twist plus Master Warcraft, emptying their hand, doing whatever you want in combat. 8 mana, of course, not inexpensive, but as we've seen, a lot of these games in this format go relatively long.
And I was speaking to the judges earlier on. One of the cool things that I didn't realize you can do with Worst Fears is, in addition to casting it, getting your opponent to discard their entire hand to Prognostic Sphinx, you get to have a look at their sideboard too.
Right, you get to know every single card in your opponent's board, and if it's game 2, you get to know what they sideboarded out. That can give you a tremendously important sense of what your opponent's priorities are and what they value in the matchup.
Of course, the dream is that you're playing some kind of a search effect, and then you get to look through their entire deck as well. Not something that we see so much of in this format, but plenty of powerful options available, assuming you can get all the mana you need to be able to cast Worst Fears. And Elspeth there down for Yuya Watanabe, and that looks like a monstrous Fleece main line for Patrick Chapin there.
Yeah, and Fleece Main Lion, not a lot of ways to deal with it in this format. Certainly immune to basically all the non-banishing light removal, but it can get blocked forever by Elspeth.
Of course, Chapin also kind of treading his own path with his constructed deck, not playing the same deck that most of the Channel Fireball Pantheon players are, but it's been working for him excellently.
Yeah, it has. He's been crushing with this deck. I mean, doing very, very well in this tournament anyway, but I really like Chapin's deck. It basically plays 4 of the most resilient and or powerful threats in the format, 4 mana confluence to help him cast them all. Of course, Courser of Crufix and Sylvan Caryatid, but right now in his, even though Patrick plays 4 Elspeths, right now Yuya has 1 active and Patrick doesn't, and in this format, that tends to spell very, very bad news.
And that Ajani, Mentor of Heroes, it's probably the Planeswalker we've seen the least in the feature match area, but every time it comes into play, it has a big impact on the game.
Johnny, right. It's either able to draw you cards and win an attrition fight, or like this, turn a lowly 1/1 soldier token into a 4/4, capable of dealing a lot of damage very fast.
I think he's actually made it a 3/3 there, just big enough to kill off a Sylvan Caryatid, and then put 1 counter on Courser of Crufix.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, making both Courser and the token big enough to kill those Sylvan Caryatids.
And that there looked like a Drowning Sorrow, I think.
I think that was a Silence the Believers.
That would
which
make
he was
sense,
able to
yes.
cast at instant speed. But, I mean, still, obviously, being able to hit Courser and a token, not the worst Silence the Believers ever cast, but certainly not the best one either.
So many things to attack here. You go for Elspeth, but you kind of know that it's just going to have a soldier jump under that bus. Elspeth's all round. The Soldier's tokens have been in fairly heavy demand in the feature match area all weekend. I don't think that's likely to change anytime soon.
No, I don't think so. But yeah, between Elspeth and we've seen a decent amount of launch the fleets too. A lot of tokens get played, and we've seen a lot of these decks just go wide. I mean, my favorite my favorite token producer that we've seen though is they call it Gruul Ultimatum. That's the
Great Revel
of the Fallen God.
Yes.
They make 4 2/2 satyrs with haste. It's a lot of satyrs.
Absolutely, and it's something that we saw powered out by Joel Larson on turn 5, I think, in one of our limited matches. But right down here, we've got 6 soldiers on one side of the board, 3 on the other. How important is it being the first person to get a Planeswalker down?
I think it's tremendously important. I mean, we see with the new Legend rule, you no longer can just play your own Elspeth and negate your opponents. You both have it. I mean, we see Xenagos the Reveler, we see Ajani, we see Elspeth, and that is just too many Planeswalkers, I think, for Patrick to deal with.
Too many mythics. The final nail in the coffin being the Worst Fears there, enough to secure that game for Yuya Watanabe. He's currently on 9-1-1, so actually a little bit behind the pace of Patrick Chapin, but ultimately in really good shape.
Yeah.
But we're going to jump across to another match now. So this is going to be Stanislav Sifka on the left of our screen up against Jamie Park. Now Sifka, he's playing a very aggressive deck. He's playing White-Red Heroic.
Yeah, we did a deck tech with Ivan Flock, who's on the same list. It's basically White-Red Heroic, split straight down the middle, 6 mountains, 6 plains. Not the best mana base, but a really explosive deck that can close the game out very fast.
Oh dear, it looks like the game against Jamie Park just finished, so then they're now sideboarding, so we will be back to our main match. This is between Reid Duke on the left of our screen against Andrea Mengucci on the right. They've just finished shuffling. They're going to draw their opening hands here, and I'm kind of hoping that they both get to keep a decent 7.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of our last live matches. Definitely want to see a good match of Magic, and I think the matchup between Bug, black-blue-green mid-range or black-blue-green control, and red-green Elspeth, just one of the defining matchups of the format. In many ways, I know Team Channel Fireball Pantheon designed their deck to have a good matchup against red-green Elspeth, but I've heard plenty of red-green Elspeth players say the exact opposite.
Yeah, I think it's something that, with Block Constructed, there's so much room for little tweaks. There's slightly more marginal cards, I suppose, that are good enough for Block Constructed that you can't guarantee that you know a matchup just because you've tested against your version of the deck.
That's a really good point. I mean, a lot of the decks that we've said are sort of a part of the same archetype or the same kind of deck. You know, they can be 20 cards off from something else in the same category. So this is definitely a lot more of a format about the way cards interact with one another sometimes than the way that individual deck types play out.
Yeah, I mean, in general, kind of a dangerous way of looking at any format, thinking, well, this deck is X% against this other deck. It's all about, in this exact situation, what do I need to do, and can I do that?
Right, and you know, there's just a big difference between some of the bug lists we've seen with, you know, Reid Duke main decking 3 copies of Drown in Sorrow, where you know, other versions are main decking 4 copies of Ashiok and hardly any removal spells at all. So within these same archetypes that are based around similar cards, you know, Courser of Krufix, Sylvan Caryatid, just a lot of variation. I can't imagine most of the bug decks are main decking, for example, 1 copy of Psychic Intrusion, which is very, you know, a control-heavy, environment-heavy call.
So we see a Courser of Krufix there, revealing Xenagos, the Reveler up there, the Planeswalker on top of Mengucci's deck. Now, potentially Mengucci here, if he sees the Courser die now, he's lost a little bit of value because he's not had the chance to play any lands, gain any life off it. But getting the first threat down still potentially quite important.
I've got to call out a crazy piece of technology in Mengucci's hand, Colossus of Akros.
Wow.
8 mana, 10/10 indestructible. For 10 it can monstrous. Get 10/1/1 counters and attack for 20 points of trample damage. Against the Naya decks, they can Banishing Light it. Not really a, you know, that particularly resilient of a threat, plus 8 mana. Bug has absolutely no way of answering this card. I guess Silence of the Believers, but Silence of the Believers has a lot of targets. But Hero's Downfall, not going to work. Drown in Sorrow, not going to work. Pelucranos Ultimate somehow definitely not going to work. So, I mean, Bile Blight not going to work. Just not a lot of ways of removing Colossus. And if the game goes long, I mean, it can end the game in 1 attack, 20 points of damage.
I love it. It seems to me like it's exactly the kind of sideboard plan you want, something that can go over the top of your opponent's plans that they're unlikely to be able to prepare for. Hero's Downfall, they're taking out Polis Crusher, and they're an Arbor Colossus for Andrea Mengucci. He's happy to say, I'm just going to throw out massive threats, run you out of removal, and then I have the ultimate trump plan.
Well, right, and if Duke is forced to use Silence of the Believers right here on Arbor Colossus, only 3 more mana until Mengucci can hit Colossus of Akros mana.
Now, obviously, there is the additional cost of making it monstrous, but once you're nearly there, you're going to get there at some point, and I've never seen a Colossus in play in anything other than the one most ridiculous limited game I've ever seen on the coverage team.
So you have seen it before, though?
That was a crazy match between Rashad and Marshall, where they each had them in play in limited.
Right.
And
Are we making up Colossus? It was there on the card reader, but now I don't really see it in Mengucci's hand. I think we were inventing a crazy piece of technology.
I think that the Arbor Colossus may have been mislabeled in the hand.
Oh, okay. All right, well, Arbor Colossus we've seen a lot of places, but I know that when I show up with this deck, I am going to be playing Colossus of Akros, and I think it's a good piece of technology against Bug. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. Play 10/10 indestructible creatures against your removal heavy decks. This is where tech comes
from, right?
There you go. I mean, that's how Psychotog happened. For a long time, people were using it to proxy their Shadow Mage infiltrators, or 'cause 1 blue black, and it turns out that Psychotog is a little bit better.
So back to what we actually have on the board and indeed in hand. We've got Xenagos the Revel in play that's made a Satyr alongside that Arbor Colossus. And Mengucci here building up a perfectly reasonable board and forcing through a little bit more damage now, trying to catch Reid Duke out before he's able to get too much going on his side of the board.
Yeah, I mean, we see Arbor Colossus there probably about to bite the dust. Yeah, and that is exactly why Silence the Believer is so powerful in this format. I mean, in a deck that's designed to just play a bunch of big mid-range threats like Polis Crusher, Arbor Colossus, Stormbreath Dragon, being able to take 2 of them out for the comparatively low price of 7 mana just completely can turn the game around.
Yeah, not tons of sources of card advantage in the format, full stop. Being able to deal with 2 big, legitimate, real threats as opposed to lots of 1/1s, not super easy. Polukranos, it can kill lots of small creatures. Pretty tough for it to deal with a few big ones, though.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way that it can deal with them is just by being a 5/5, but this is definitely a format where you want to be able to untap and use your monstrous ability first. You see Mengucci counting the mana there, saying, all right, I'm going to come in. Reid can activate Polukranos for 2, but Mengucci can go over the top with Polis Crusher, able to at least make him treat.
And of course, the Lightning Strike in his hand means that if he did engineer a fight in the wrong moment with the wrong Satyr, he may lose his Polukranos at just the wrong moment. Yeah, this could get ugly. Let's see what we've got coming here.
Yeah.
So a monstrous Polis Crusher, and that a Bile Blight on the Polis Crusher. So Duke there, quite smartly, he's represented the Polukranos ultimate and the Polukranos monstrosity. I apologize, and that then sort of blinded Mengucci to the idea that actually there might be another instant in his hand.
Yeah, and we still see 2 points of damage from Polis Crusher, and then 3 points of damage from Lightning Strike. We see he could. Did he just cast that Sylvan Caryatid? He could have theoretically Monstrous for. Oh, but that wouldn't do anything because the Polis Crusher gets to fight Polukranos back. So either way, the Polukranos is going to hit the bin this turn.
Yeah, so we're at sort of comparative parity here. Both players living off the top of their deck, but one Planeswalker in play.
And that's exactly why the Planeswalkers are so powerful in situations like this. Any single time that either players run out of resources, the incremental advantage for the Planeswalker is just huge. And wow, a big Corsair Crufix here, further cementing Mengucci's advantage in the top deck war as Reid just struggles to draw anything relevant.
The saving grace, I suppose, of Reid here. At least he knows that the lightning's coming. So all those Satyrs getting in unblocked. So Reid Duke here looking like he might be in a little bit of trouble. And it's going to be on to game 3. We still have some fight in this one, boys. There's going to be a king at the end of the match. Will it be the king of Friday, Andrea Mengucci, or will it be our current king of the hill, Reid Duke? But we're going to have another bash at watching a little bit of Stanislav Sivka against Jamie Park. They are now playing their match, and we're jumping across and see a whole lot of action on the left-hand side of our board for Stanislav Sivka.
And this is exactly what Sivka's deck tries to do, just flood the board with permanents. We see a lot of one-mana creatures. It's a lot of hoplites out there, and Jamie just struggling to stay alive. On the other end, Corsair Crufix, great blocker, gains you a lot of life. So, I mean, this is just a classic matchup in this format. You've got the somewhat slower mid-range deck against the hyper-aggressive red-white heroic deck.
If you're wondering what those red-white soldiers are all about, I think that our feature match area may have been taxed to its limits in terms of finding enough mono-white soldier tokens, but those ones have come from Launch the Fleet. That's where they've come from. Technically, they are just white.
Gaining 2 life every time Jamie plays a land is just absolutely huge here. I mean, that negates, you know, any one of those hoplite attacks. You know, being able to block. I mean, it looks like Stanislav has a lot of permanents on the board, but he is going to be hard pressed to get through this offense or this defense.
And he's still on just 2 lands, one of which is a mana confluence. So that not a big help in terms of the overall life totals.
Yeah, I guess at this point, your just deck does what it has to do. If Jamie elects to block the favored hoplites with the 2-3 hoplites with his coursers, he's able to absorb more damage, but he's not able to kill anything. So basically, Sifka saying, okay, you can take away 2 of my creatures. In exchange, I'm going to hit you for 6 points of damage, though. There's only so many times that Jamie's going to be able to afford to do that.
And Stan has 2 lands untapped, 3 cards in his hand. There's a very real chance that he's going to play some kind of a spell here to make any kind of block a little bit punished. It's just a matter of working out which trick is the one that Jamie is most concerned about.
Sifka has numerous tricks. We saw launch the fleet. He also plays 4 copies of Coordinated Assault. I think 4 copies of God's Willing from the deck he did earlier, but looks like none of those are going to come through as he simply says, all right, you can eat 2 of my creatures, and I'm going to deploy more threats to the board.
I mean, I guess the funny thing is that there are lots of decks where the idea of having to play a game where you only get up to 2 lands is just, it's a nightmare. It's never, ever going to work for you. But here we see the red-white aggressive heroic deck, up to a point, it's probably kind of fine with just drawing 2 lands, because that means it's drawing all business.
Right. Your only 3-mana spell is Mogus's Warhound, and even Mogus's Warhound, you can you just hard cast it for 2 mana. It's got 2 copies of Brimma's King of Ereskos in the sideboard, but that is the only 3-mana spell it has. So, yeah, definitely able to operate just fine off 2 mana.
And that's Silence of the Believers there on top of Jamie Park's deck. Probably not as exciting as the lands that he's playing every single turn's gain 2 life. 4 mana, not a particularly great rate to kill off any one of these creatures, because they're all fairly underwhelming individually, right?
Right, yeah. If you spend 4, I mean, as powerful as we saw Silence the Believers against the red-green monstrous deck, it is the exact opposite here. It tends to be good against decks that play 2 or 3 very powerful game-defining threats, bad against decks that flood the board with weenie creatures and tokens.
So here we see Sifka is quick to get into the red zone here.
Yeah, just immediately leaning forward, going into the combat phase. But, I mean, Kiora 3 blockers. Sifka's going to have to do a lot of damage fast.
Yes.
Of course, Stanislav Sifka, he is one of our top-ranked players and also a chess grandmaster. He's absolutely happy to think things through as much as need be and more often than not come to the right answer. It looks like that a Dragon Mantle on a favored hoplite. So that favored hoplite, Heroic's triggered, it gets +1/+1 counter and is not taking damage this turn.
Yeah, I think where Sifka wants to get is the place where that hoplite can attack through these coursers. Even if he only trades with one of them, that means that Jamie Park's not gaining 2 life a turn off each of his lands. But, I mean, growing the hoplite bigger and bigger just presents a juicier and juicier target for Silence the Believers.
I mean, I guess he knows the Silence of the Believers there. He kind of would rather it gets burned sooner rather than later, because later means that it's going to be hitting 2, I mean, probably not 3 targets, but at least 2 targets.
Sure. And right now, if he does it for 2, he still has to tap his Sylvan Caryatid, which is just 1 fewer blocker.
But Jamie here with cards in hand, Caryatid is in play, a bit of scry on the top of his deck is a pretty positive position. If I had to call it right now, I'd say it's probably Jamie Park's game, and I am going to call it right now because we're going to be moving back to Table A, where we've got our final game between current King of the Hill, Reid Duke, and past King of the Hill, potentially King of the Hill again, Andrea Mengucci of Italy. So a little bit of scrying action on the right-hand side of the board there for Andrea Mengucci. He's having a little think about whether or not to keep that one on top, but it looks like he has got a Sylvan Caryatid in his hand, which almost all of the most explosive, impressive starts from this red-green deck come from resolving a Sylvan Caryatid on turn 2.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in my playtest results if I was one of these teams at this event to just look at how frequently you win with turn 2 Sylvan Caryatid versus how frequently you don't. I would bet that it has got to be like a 20 percentage point difference. I mean, just such a strong opening can get you so far out ahead, particularly if you're casting it on the play.
Absolutely, and he's got enough lands that come into play untapped that realistically casting it on 2 is a reasonable expectation, and potentially then casting a 4-drop on turn 3, again, perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, being able to play something like Xenagos when your opponent has nothing on the battlefield. And in fact, Xenagos is so powerful here right now because Reid doesn't even have the second black for Hero's Downfall. He happens to have a mana confluence in his hand, doesn't have the downfall, but when you're Mengucci and you know how many temples the bug deck plays, that puts you in an extremely good position. Now with a Satyr that's already hit Reid and Xenagos able to make 2 mana, Mengucci can do some very powerful things this turn.
Some interesting stuff going on for Reid Duke here, though. We see there's a Dissolve in his hand and a Reaper of the Wilds in play. Now, that a card that we've not seen quite so much of in this block constructed format, but very, very powerful indeed. So more Sylvan Caryatids there and a Polis Crusher. The board on Mengucci's side of things getting a little bit out of hand now. It's just a matter of whether or not Reid can find the time to answer any of these threats, really.
Now, interestingly, Mengucci opted to play a lot of permanents to the battlefield rather than go ahead and play a Stormbreath Dragon. That means that if Reid passes with a lot of mana open and gets a second blue, he can actually dissolve Stormbreath Dragon. That said, Reid's still got to worry about that Polis Crusher. I mean, just a blistering start from Mengucci. He has access to an unbelievable amount of mana this turn.
And there we see Reid Duke's hand, plenty of power in there, and the mana confluence turning on an awful lot of different things. It means he's got his double black, it means he's got his double blue. One way or another, he's got an answer to something. It's just a matter of, there's quite a lot of threats from Andrea Mengucci.
Yeah, a huge draw of Silence of the Believers there, allowing him to, if Mengucci didn't worry about Stormbreath Dragon this turn, he would be able to bait the monstrous ability from Polis Crusher and hit it with Silence of the Believers, basically costing Mengucci an entire turn. As it stands right now, he's got to decide, do I want to dissolve this dragon, or do I want to try and cast Silence of the Believers?
It looks like we're going to see a dissolve. Sorry, Dragon, you don't get to play this game, and I get Scry. Cancel has never quite looked so good.
Scry 1 is a very powerful ability, we've come to find out. Mengucci deciding, interestingly, to attack the 2/2 Satyr and the 1/2 Voyaging Satyr into Reaper of the Wilds. If Mengucci has no other effects, this will give Reid a free Scry.
I mean, I guess if you've already seen a Scry that turn, I didn't quite see whether or not the Dissolve put something to the bottom or not. If you see something left on top, you're like, I might as well let you Scry again.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that is an interesting sub-game that's come to define not only its constructed format, but the limited format of just the Scry minigame. Knowing whether you can expect your opponent to draw something live, knowing how much to value one of your threats when you're scrying. Those Scry 1s can really add up over the course of the game, and I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing so many superstar players at the top of the standings, is that they're able to manipulate these incremental advantages and translate them into game wins in a way that not every player can do.
Well, yeah, I mean, with this amount of Scry going on for many of the best decks in the format, effectively, everyone has a reasonable shot at getting a really good draw, as long as they can correctly identify what a really good draw actually is for the circumstance of the game that they're in.
No, that's completely true, yeah, because, I mean, a lot of these cards are tremendously different, not just in individual matchups, but in different circumstances within those matchups. We see Drown in Sorrow from Reid being extremely important in some cases, against Elspeth tokens and Satyr tokens, but not particularly effective against Polis Crusher.
Oh, a little bit. He's not quite sure. Andrea Mengucci there almost got into the red zone and then kind of thought better of it. He's going to stop and have a little bit of a think. We have got time in the feature match area. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to be doing, but no, here they come.
This is pretty unreal. You see Mengucci using his creature mana from Xenagos first to Monstrous, so that if Reid responds with a removal spell, he'll still have enough natural mana to be able to Monstrous the other Polis Crusher. Pretty unbelievable and pretty unprecedented that he's able to Monstrous 2 Polis Crushers in the same turn. And with that Xenagos ticking up as much as it is, we might even be seeing Mengucci threatening to ultimate Xenagos. Not something you see every day.
A funny thing, actually, yeah. I mean, ultimately, no pun intended, I would say that I've probably only seen 2 or 3 Planeswalker ultimates all weekend, in spite of the fact that I've seen more Planeswalkers in play this weekend than most.
Take 1. Death Touch. 11.
So, of course, Death Touch on that Reaper of the Wilds, meaning that no matter how big Polar's Crusher is, it's not going to be able to survive combat, but it does trample, so is damage still going through on Reid Duke? He is now at just 11 life.
Right, Reaper of the Wilds able to gain Death Touch. I mean, Reaper of the Wilds does a lot of things. The question is whether Reid is going to be able to threaten Xenagos enough before it's able to ultimate. Without a card like Supreme Verdict in the format, even if Mengucci is able to dump 2 or 3 threats in off that ultimate ability, which lets you look at 7 cards and basically put any number of creatures or lands, basically 2 of the things that Mengucci's deck is full of on the battlefield, that can put him pretty far ahead. Reid's deck doesn't really have that many ways to come back besides Silence of the Believers, which we just saw cast the previous turn.
I mean, I guess one of the challenges when it comes to ultimates on Planeswalkers is, do you activate them as soon as you get up to exactly the right amount of loyalty, or do you get maybe a little bit greedy and try and get your loyalty even higher so you can keep your Planeswalker around when doing so?
I think that that question answers itself when you have a second copy in your hand, but in general, yeah, we saw, wow. Oh my goodness.
So 1 miss, but I don't think he's going to mind too much because that's...
Oh my goodness.
So we're going to get some triggers here.
I think we're going to get just a few. Wow. So we're going to see a temple, we're going to see some life.
Oh, we're just getting the Oracle text on Xenagos to make sure that everything works. So I think they all come into play at the same time, right?
Let's look at the library. You may put any number of them onto that. Yeah, I think they all enter the battlefield technically at the same time. It's just a matter of what you want to trigger when.
Yes.
This is a lot of triggers and a lot of permanents.
I mean, even if all he got was the 2 Arbor Colossus, he'd be in pretty good shape.
Oh, and right now, I mean, he has enough mana to cast his other Xenagos, plus 1 it, and actually activate one of those Colossi.
Yeah, this has been pretty big. I mean, they're not called ultimates for no reason, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, and really with Xenagos, the ultimate it's like a Genesis wave for 7, basically. You know, really powerful effect, but not as game-ending as some things, but 2 Arbor Colossus is just a lot of threats to deal with.
And we were speaking earlier on about the fact there's not that many answers to Prognostic Sphinx in the format. While the monstrous ability of Arbor Colossus often doesn't successfully kill a Prognostic Sphinx, tapping it down's pretty good, and actually, in some cases, look at the look on Reid's face there, he can't quite believe what's happening to him here.
That's got to become a meme at some point. That is not a happy Reid Duke.
Now that you've mentioned it, I'm going to give it about a minute and a half before someone has giffed that one right out. So he's got Unravel the Ether that he's discarded to his Prognostic Sphinx to give it hexproof, so it's not going to die to the monstrous ability. But has he got enough mana to do it with the other Arbor Colossus too and effectively force another discard in response?
Right, and this is interesting. Can you respond to Xenagos' +1? I don't think you can because it's a mana ability.
It's actually a Planeswalker ability,
really?
So you can respond to it.
Is it? Oh, okay, well, all of this is elementary with Mengucci with something like 20 permanents on the table.
So I believe we still have 1 game left on our table there that we haven't quite worked out who the king is yet. But, oh no, sorry, what am I talking about? The king is back. Andrea Mengucci, he had to give up that chair for all of, 3-4 rounds? Like, he had to do the whole draft this morning, not in the feature match area. But as it turns out, he's back.
That is a player that knows where he wants to sit. I think that is the motive of the story.
And the funny thing is, of course, that the whole of yesterday, well, maybe not the whole of it, but at least half of yesterday, Andrea Mengucci was sort of saying to me, can I get an interview at the end of the round? Can I get an interview at the end of the round? He's been doing so well. This is, I think previously he's played in 4 Pro Tours. His best finish before was 9-7. And when I was sort of saying, if you keep winning, I'm sure that we'll get you an interview at some point. And I kind of thought it was always going to be me, but by the sounds of it, actually, it's not going to be me, because the time that he's going to be interviewed is actually pretty shortly. I know that we got Marshall down on the floor. They're just setting up down there.
Oh, you're not going to run over there and try to interview
as much as I
and
would love
commentate
to
at the
run
same
over
time?
there, I couldn't bring myself to steal Marshall's thunder like that. That just wouldn't be fair.
You're so generous.
But fairly shortly, we'll be able to find out from the little master himself, the king who has returned. The return of the king. There's so many puns. I feel like
and what better, the king who has returned, what better way to crown yourself king than win a Planeswalker Ultimate?
And it looks like we might be just about ready to head down to the area for an interview now. So we're going to go down to the feature match area now to speak with Marshall Sutcliffe and Andrea Mengucci.
Hey guys, Marshall Sutcliffe down here in the feature match area with Andrea Mengucci, and that was an incredible game. Now, you told me, Andrea, that Reid Duke is actually your favorite player here on the Pro Tour.
Yes, it is. I've always read this article, always keep in mind what you say, like avoid red in draft. I always tend to do grand blue or grand black, and always play Jand when you play Jand. Like I'm like fan number 1, I may say.
Okay, now tell us what it was like. You ultimated Xenagos. What just happened?
Yes, in playtest, I ultimate Xenagos like twice and never hit. Like I hit the 4 lands and 2 Planeswalker or some spells or some created. Like today I hit like 2 Colossus, which was the perfect answer because he has the 3/5, the Prognostic Sphinx. So it was incredible, you know.
And the two Colossus was just the beginning. You hit 3 other creatures besides that too.
Yeah. The 3 other creatures are not the best, but starting off with 2 Colossus was like is my day.
So one question, you drew Xenagos for the turn, then you ultimated Xenagos. If you didn't draw it, would you just keep Xenagos on the table, or would you have done it anyway?
Actually, I drew it the turn before, but I don't know, because he has the Sphinx, so he could have attacked Xenagos. So maybe the ultimate is like random, unlucky. And since I've been so lucky those days, maybe I can count on that.
Well, you are sitting at X1 here at the Pro Tour, so random and lucky might be part of it, but skill probably has a good part of it too. Andrea, thanks for your time. For Andrea, Marshall Sutcliffe, send it back to the booth.
Congratulations there to Andrea Mengucci. I kind of feel like we're all living in Andrea Mengucci's dream right now. It's all just kind of working for him. He's had 1 loss so far to Hall of Famer Patrick Chapin. Just an incredible performance from the Italian.
Well, I mean, I think that's a healthy attitude that he has, too. Look, anybody that's sitting at X1 at a Pro Tour, you've got to get a little bit lucky. You can't be ashamed of that. Got to play to your outs. He's clearly playing well. He's got a great deck. I expect to see a lot more of him, not just at this tournament, but several tournaments to come.
Well, yeah, I mean, if nothing else, he's going to be at the King of the Hill table in the feature match area next round. But we're just done with this round, so we're going to be heading back to the news desk now. I've been Tim Willoughby. This is Zach Hill here at Pro Tour. Jenny into Nix.
Holy wow, the story of Andrea Mengucci is bonkers, bonkers, bonkers. For all money, when you go to King of the Hill through day 1, you just expect he's going to crash and burn on day 2. Who is this guy? 29-28 was his record from 4 previous Pro Tour appearances. A coin flip, essentially. So 7-1, you think, there's the bubble burst, come back, don't draft terribly well, lose a couple, maybe go 1-2, disappear, finish, you finally look him up, he finishes 47th or something. Not Andrea Mengucci. He goes win, 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 obliterate pod 1, get up to 10-1, and then he wins again over Reid Duke. So Mengucci 11-1, Reid Duke 10-2. Also 11-1, the innovator Patrick Chapin is 11-1. He defeated Yuya Watanabe 9-2-1. That draw for Watanabe could yet be very important. Guillaume Waffatapa faced Jared Butcher. Waffatapa wins that one, goes to 10-2, definitely with a loss to give. Butcher at 9-3, well, the 4th loss, we keep saying it's critical. It is. Whether it puts you out for sure is debatable. We think there may be 1 or even 2 12-4s making it in. So Butcher's still alive, very definitely, at 9-3. Then this round, a slew of 8-3s trying to get to 9-3 and be comfortably alive, as opposed to 8-4, almost out the door. So a bunch of those results. Andrew Beckstrom playing Planeswalker control, he's up to 9-3, defeated Dan Jordan of the United States. Jordan at 8-4. Conley Woods is down to 8-4 because Ben Friedman wins that one, goes to 9-3, very much alive. Now, Zwischenzug, or Paul Nemeth, to give him his full real name, Zwischenzug on Magic Online, he's at 9-4, defeated Jason Ellis playing Mono Black Aggro 8-4. Joel Larson is 9-3 in an all-European clash. He defeated Even Flock, top 8 from Warsaw last weekend. Flock down to 8-4. Raf Levy is still very much alive. He's at 9-3. He's got a terrific deck. Can't wait to show you that on the video wall in a little while. Owen Turtenwald is up to 9-3. Chan Zhe Hang of Hong Kong, 9-3, at the expense of Shaheen Surani. Esper Control, we don't think will be in the top 8. He needs 4 wins and some tiebreak help. And Paul Rietzel up to 9-3. Todd Anderson gets the dreaded 4th loss. Will he be able to claw his way in at 12-4? Jamie Park up to 10-2. Stanislav Sifka still with a loss to give at 9-3. Sunwook Nam 9-3 from South Korea. Darwin Castle falling away 8-4, has to stop the rot. 4 rounds to go for him. And finally, just coming in front of me, Josh Utter-Layton goes up to 10-2 at the expense of Scott Markison, 9-3. Those are most of the matches that matter. Still a few to come in. But right now, I'm going to send you across for a Mono Black Aggro Masterclass. Here's Jason Ellis and Randy Buehler.